So it's finished Munster 33, the Ospreys 6. Bernard Jackman and Fiona Steed were watching it with me. Guys, obviously disappointing for Munster. Fate wasn't in their own hands going into the game after results yesterday, but overall thoughts, a decent blowout for them?
Yeah, it was a decent blowout, and they stuttered and coughed to get going, but eventually, they got a bonus point just after half time, and at the end it was all Munster, and they got to use their bench. So I think it's pleasing enough, but it would have been a very hard week for them, and they'll just pack their bags now and concentrate on trying to have a good Pro 14 campaign.
I was downstairs speaking to Jack O'Donoghue a few minutes ago, and he was saying that obviously they were keeping an eye on results yesterday, but the message all during the week was, regardless of what happens in those two matches on Saturday, whether you have a chance or you don't, the message and the outlook doesn't actually change for this game whatsoever.
No, and I think that, they had to still play the game, and they had to win, and they had to prove that if it did come to it, that they needed the bonus point win to progress, that they were capable of getting it. So we knew before coming in, like you say, that they weren't going to progress, but they still had to give a good performance, and they still had to get that result. Otherwise, people would be going, well, they wouldn't have got it anyway. So it's the best they could have hoped for out of today. I think there was some strong performances, and we've alluded to it during the comms in that, the young lads coming through, Craig Casey coming on, Jack O'Donoghue, as you say, was really, really good, and then to see CJ and Conor Murray back to somewhere near form.
Mm-hmm. CJ and Conor Murray, that's exactly where I was going to go next. Yeah. We might start with Conor Murray because there looks to be a fantastic shootout going on between himself and John Cooney at the moment. What way would you be leaning if you were coaching?
I was leaning towards giving Cooney a start and to really reward form, but I thought Conor put his best foot forward today. I thought he was very sharp, and that's what Andy Farrell would want. He would want players on form. CJ, Fiona mentioned as well, had a very strong game, looked really dynamic. We know his work rate is always very consistent, and I think in general all the Irish players that went to the World Cup are in really good form now. Some of them got back to form straight away, but seeing Conor and CJ today really gives you confidence that Ireland have a cracking chance of having a good Six Nations.
Whatever way Andy Farrell goes, whether it's John Cooney or Conor Murray, is it no harm for Conor Murray that someone is kind of putting a rocket up and putting a little bit of pressure on him?
No, absolutely. I think it's a genuine contender. I think Conor's been out on his own for the last few years, really, in terms of it was a case of if he was injured, there was a talk about who would come in or who would come in as second, and the choice was always for who was back up to him, whereas now he's definitely in a gunfight, but I think he brought it out today, and I think it's really, really good. It's healthy, and across even the back row, if you look at Doris and you look at Max Deegan yesterday, you look at Van de Vlier, and then you look at CJ and you look at Peter O'Mahony, not all five of those are going to be in the starting 23 in a couple of weeks' time, and there's another huge thought process and a huge conundrum for him.
On CJ Stander, obviously everyone for the last few weeks has been talking about Quaylen Doris and Max Deegan. CJ Stander had an excellent game today, but has he done enough to convince a lot of people that he should still be ahead of those two guys?
It's going to be interesting. I think he could play six, to be honest. I think maybe he could move to six and give him a little bit of easier carries in the wider channels, and Van der Vlier at 7, and then maybe new blood at 8. But Peter O'Mahony won't give up his position too easily either. So listen, they'll all go into camp now, and they've got 2 weeks before the first game. I think they go to Portugal, and I'm sure Farrell is going to use training as a selection process as well. Joe did that for a long time. If you had a bad day's training, you could lose your place. And potentially during the World Cup, he went away from that. But I think if Farrell holds that has that philosophy, it'll get the best out of players.
And finally then, obviously the story of the weekend is Saracens being relegated into the championship for next season. Your overall thoughts? I know, Bernard, you were saying that you actually think it might be a little bit too harsh.
I think everyone's taking great pleasure in Saracens' demise, and I agree that they had a way of operating that rubbed people up the wrong way, and potentially they were overconfident and over exuberant about portraying the values that they live by, and then we catch them cheating. But I think if you take into account the fine was 5.3 million, one of the biggest fines ever in sport. They docked 35 points. That was enough of a fine and punishment. In my opinion, it was always going to be very difficult for them to get back under the cap this year. So they obviously haven't been able to, and Premiership Rugby have decided to send them down. But I think it's probably a bit over harsh.
Is it the biggest scandal in professional rugby in the Northern Hemisphere at the very least, Fiona?
I think it probably is, and I think we don't have the whole story at all, and I don't think we'll ever get the whole story. The fact that they opted for relegation, other than opening up the books and showing exactly what was happening there, so it's huge. Like, we couldn't believe it yesterday when it was coming up on Twitter that okay, they're actually going to be relegated, and I think there's a lot more to it behind the scenes that we don't know about. So certainly it doesn't take away from that they're an excellent team and that they're going to be a huge, if it is them against Leinster in the quarter-final, it's going to be a massive game, and they're still the same players. The fact that they're getting paid more, and to be fair, a lot of them they grew themselves, they brought up through the ranks themselves. Yes, they paid the money to keep them there, and they brought in others, but it's their own team, and it's still, they still would have beat them regardless of whether they were paying them so much extra.
And at the time of speaking, they are going to be in a quarter-final, it looks like, against Leinster. If there's a team out there that's capable of a backs-to-the-wall performance and saying up yours to everyone else, everyone's out to hate us, it's a team like Saracens, isn't it?
It's a disaster for Leinster, because in actual fact now they can just focus on the, obviously they're going to send players to England, but they can focus on that game, so the Premiership becomes irrelevant now. So the I suppose what they threw at us as Pro 14 teams for years, saying, oh, you can micromanage your players to be ready for knockout stages. Well, they can do that, and the quality of players they have is phenomenal. Think back to the final in Newcastle last year, where their power just stopped Leinster. And let's be honest, Leinster haven't had a challenge like them. Leon, Northampton, and Treacy. It's on the group like Munster. So, Leinster are a brilliant side, but that is going to be an unbelievable test.
Bernard, Fiona, thanks a million for joining me this afternoon.